Hello, I'm Rick Boddy. I'm the Chief Investigator for the PRESTO study, and in this short video we're going to talk through the principles of good clinical practice. So I'm joined by Mary Speak.
Hi, and I'm the Workforce Lead for the Clinical Research Network. We're going to look at how we can ensure that anyone who wants to take part in the PRESTO study can do so from a delivery point of view. So those paramedics who want to take part and support pre-hospital delivery of the project can do so. As we work through the webinar, there are several stages where we've planned for you to stop and watch a video that either captures what we wish to describe or it helps summarise a particular point. However, if you don't have time for that, if you're able to just watch the webinar straight through, and then, hopefully at some point in the future, it would be nice to have if you were able to look back at those videos that we have planned. Also, some background to what clinical research is, how important it is to the NHS, how research is organised in the NHS, because that would explain to some degree how your service has become involved in delivering the study. We then need to look at the practical aspects, the things that sort of control quality. So we need to look at delivering research in the NHS, the practice standards, roles and responsibilities, a short look at documentation and data, but your role in this study is actually mainly around engaging patients. So we'll be looking at that specifically. And then Rick will be looking at considerations that are specific to the PRESTO study and its success. So clinical research, it isn't exactly rocket science, but it can be complicated some of the time. And some of that complication really can be down to, in short, what we can call red tape, but really it's the important checks and balances that we need to do within the NHS to make sure that everyone is safe and the quality we produce is of the highest. So with that in mind, this is simply an introduction and it's focused on how we deliver research in the NHS, but specifically the PRESTO study. So taking part in this training or in the PRESTO study doesn't give permission for anyone to deliver other research projects. That can only be given by your employer or the study sponsor for that particular study. So, clinical research. Is it important? Well, research is central to the NHS and we need the evidence from research to deliver better care. We have such a unique healthcare system, we need that evidence to be able to make wise decisions in the future. So it's important to the NHS. It's known as a frontline service for the NHS. It's listed within the NHS Constitution for all NHS providers to be research active. And it's important in assessing what we do, evaluating what we do, and improving what we do to make sure that we use the... So it's not only important to the NHS, it's also important to our patients, and of course we are those as well. And it's also important to our staff. So as a summary, and also to sort of give more context to what clinical research is, we've set a video here to be watched, and we've chunked it up within the podcast in a few parts. So in this first part, Alan Gore sort of describes what research is and the benefits of making sure that our health system is research active. So at this point, what does clinical research mean to you? Is it something that you've taken part in before? Is it something that's simply been part of your studies? Have you appraised evidence to determine patient care in the past? Or is it something that you've actively delivered? Have you taken part in research? Do you know someone who's taken part in research? Are you able to reflect on whether they were good experiences or not? And maybe that could be a building block for you in your practice going forward with the PRESTO study. What would it mean to be more involved in research delivery? Is it something that you could foster an interest in the future? And in particular for the PRESTO study, later on we're going to come back to patient engagement. How would you describe clinical research to a member of the public? So, how clinical research is organised in the NHS? We have within NHS England the National Institute for Health Research, and it's been around now for 12, almost 13 years. And it's there as the research arm of health and social care. there are 4 particular work streams within the National Institute for Health Research, which I'll now call the NIHR for my sanity, if that's okay. We have the faculty across the top. We have those who are either in training or the investigators. So across the top, we have the investigators of the future. On the right, we have where a lot of the funding is held to support research programs within the future. At the bottom, we have research systems, of course, that link directly back up to the Department of Health and Social Care. And on the left, we have the infrastructure, which is divided in 2 on the schema that you can see. So we have the Clinical Research Network, which is where I work, and then we have the clinical research facilities, centres and units. And the reason they're split into 2 is because they have 2 different funding streams. So you would be working on the PRESTO study as a collaborator on a clinical research network project. So the clinical research network has that vision of making sure that clinical research is an integral part of healthcare for all. And the purpose is about making sure that people that from a national point of view, we can make people in the NHS better by enabling and embedding high quality research as an integral part of healthcare. So aspiring to the whole NHS England workforce delivering research as part of their everyday job. So from a network point of view, we facilitate delivery within the NHS. We support studies, whether they are non-commercial, whether they're academic, or whether they're from the life science industry. And we do that in collaboration and partnership with many organisations, NHS and non-NHS. We have a specific role in performance managing, making sure that we achieve value for money. We manage that research delivery budget. Each of the 15 CRNs has a specific budget. We provide the infrastructure, and from my perspective, we provide a workforce planning function and workforce development to make sure that the clinical research workforce deliver high quality research.
So this is about the PRESTO study. So the PRESTO study is funded by the NIHR, Research for Patient Benefit Scheme, and as a result, it's supported by the NIHR CRN, so it's on the portfolio. So we have our PRESTO study team. You'll have met me and Eloise, the trial manager, and the chief investigator. We have a coordinating team at the hospital, Abdul doing his PhD on the study. And we've got the ambulance services in the northwest, southwest, West Midlands and Scotland all involved. And also within those territories, we've got a number of emergency departments involved as well.
So if you have time, we'd like you to go back to Professor Almgore and listen to a summary, but with some more context about clinical research across health and social care. So we're going to look at delivering NHS clinical research for a while, and actually look at what clinical research delivery is, especially to put this in context, because we may all have a particular understanding of what research is, but when it comes to clinical research and its delivery, that usually describes a particular aspect of care and treatment that's determined within a study protocol. And within that study protocol, it's set out how the research question will be answered through the conduct of the study, how the scientific integrity and data quality to be achieved, including things like lab processes. It helps to ensure the rights and safety and well-being of participants are protected and complies with all the applicable standards for the type of research and for the kind of care that sort of surrounds that. The protocol has to have been assessed by all applicable groups to give permissions. And as far as can possibly happen, it should be aligned with standard care to make sure that the study is successful, but to help facilitate participant recruitment and retention, but also to make sure that anyone who wants to deliver research in the NHS can do. So earlier on, we mentioned about clinical research not being rocket science. And this is one of the checks and balances that we have to sort of get over when we're starting to plan a study. And that is who can deliver research. So it's a sponsor or an employer's decision about who can deliver research. And put simply, it's someone who's qualified by education, training and experience for each delegated duty or task within a study protocol. And that can be changeable or interpretable according to the level of risk the study proposes or the level of risk that person and the skills and knowledge that they bring proposes to the protocol itself. So to be accountable for the delivery of the research protocol, there needs to be a really good understanding of the applicable standards that relate to study design, and enough for these standards to be appropriately applied in practice. So that person needs to respond appropriately according to those standards and understand the potential impact of any decisions that they make, of their conduct in particular, on both participant safety and the quality of the research data. And because of this is where the rocket science element comes in. It has resulted occasionally in a tendency to view everyone as accountable, leading to overtraining and an environment or a culture where research could only be delivered by research employed staff or people who have undertaken GCP or good clinical practice training. So within this study, to facilitate a wider team approach, the PRESTO study sponsor has assessed that our proportionate training pathway and this training package is appropriate for staff who will deliver the pre-hospital elements of the protocol, utilising your specialist knowledge and skills that are required within standard care. So to break this down a little within this study, we've identified the aspects of care and treatment that need to be delivered by people who usually do that. We've developed the fundamentals level training, and there are standard operating instructions to ensure that these tasks are completed in a standardised way and that they comply with research requirements. And then the third thing that we've done is we've isolated the parts of the protocol that do require someone who is accountable and who needs freedom to apply their research-specific knowledge. And these are the people who have to have evidence of GCP training. So standards for clinical research delivery. Even though we've described an accountable person as requiring something called GCP training, we still all need to have a look, or we need to have an understanding of standards for clinical research delivery, enough to understand when not to intervene and when to intervene. So within the PRESTO study, so we're going to look at clinical research standards just for a short spell. So the significance of standards in themselves, we use the outcomes of research to inform clinical decisions and guidance. And what we need to always remember is that if the research process becomes flawed, the information becomes reliable, undermining that day-to-day practice of healthcare. So for that reason, we have these checks and balances. So we have quality standards for the conduct of clinical research, and they are essential to ensure we conduct safe and meaningful studies. So within this country, UK-wide, we have an overarching national standard known as the UK Policy for Health and Social Care. We also have an international standard for the conduct of clinical research, which is known as good clinical practice. And the aims of both, of any of the standards that are applicable within research, because some obviously have a research context that we need to remember, is that it's about making sure that we protect the rights, safety and well-being of the participants, and that data that we generate is of the highest quality possible. So the principles of the UK policy framework and good clinical practice are the foundation of high quality ethical research practice. And they developed from a real need from real cases, as these photographs highlight here. But these cases are still generated, and that's the reason why we need checks and balances within our system. Now, within a foundation level, and for the PRESTO study, full GCP training is not required, so we don't need to understand all of the research principles in detail, but they do include principles such as, number one, the rights to safety and well-being of the trial subjects or the study subjects should prevail over the interests of science and society. And all 14 principles are along that line. They're about protecting the patient, they're about protecting the data. And so for you delivering the PRESTO study, you don't need to understand the detail. That's the person who we've listed as the accountable person with a GCP certificate who needs to understand that. What you need to understand is that there is somebody who's safeguarding that for you, somebody that you can go and talk to if you've got a query. So there are other standards that have research elements that apply. We obviously have overarching applicable regulations for most of the things that we do, such as the things listed here, like data protection and human tissue. You then have local NHS trust and organisational policies and procedures, and your own professional registration standard that will have research elements, research limitations, or specifics that need to be adhered to.
So we realised in PRESTO that we don't need to put everybody through full GCP training, so we've put together this abbreviated package so that you just know the fundamentals, the things that are relevant to you undertaking the parts of the study in the pre-hospital environment. So we put together some standard operating procedures that talk about the things that apply to you, so how to approach patients and take informed consent, how to screen them to check that they're eligible, how to take the blood from the patients, how to record the data, and that's it. And we'll only talk really in this about those fundamentals, the things that apply to you. The rest of it you don't need to worry about.
So we need to look for a little at roles and responsibilities, so that you understand sort of the link between yourself and between Rick and with whoever's sort of your local study coordinator as well. So the key roles that we have within the research process, they're there to provide oversight and to support study conduct. But we have the sponsor, and for the PRESTO study, this is Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. We have the chief investigator, Rick. We also have a principal investigator.
So that's the person at each institution that's taking part in the trial who's in charge of it for that institution. So we have an investigator who's the lead at each ambulance service, and we've got an investigator who's the lead at each NHS trust as well that's taking part, and that's the local PI or principal investigator.
Lovely. And the person or the people performing either of these three roles can delegate the tasks associated with their role to others within the site team who has research training, but they always remain ultimately responsible for them. So the site team, and that doesn't include yourself within the PRESTO study, and that's a wide range of people who make up this local site team. So it might include the clinical team, pharmacy, labs and others. But they are the staff who are participating in the study aspects that are additional to standard care. And for yourself, you will be performing both functions simultaneously. So research participants would give their consent to participate in research for the site team to access their data and to adhere to their allocated treatment regime depending on the study design. So your responsibilities. You have a responsibility to follow the instructions provided through documentation and training on things like the local standard operating procedures for this study, for study-specific instructions, and for any study-specific worksheets or performer you might be given. If you're unsure about anything in these documents or have any questions that's not covered, you would need to escalate it to your clinical research lead. And you should also escalate any issues you feel may impact on the integrity of the data produced or on the safety of participants. So I'm going to spend a little time looking at documentation and data, not something that you're unfamiliar with, but as part of the clinical research process, of course, we have to make sure that the data generated is of the highest quality. So we have here on the slide a GCP, or a good clinical practice principle, explaining why we need to collect data and where we keep data, what we call data. So things like we have study data, we have source data. You will be generating both types, and so therefore we will ask you to do that in a particular way. So for the PRESTO study, we need to obviously collect high quality data. Whether it's handwritten or electronic, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be complete, it needs to be legible, attributable to somebody, and timely. Now, we also need to look at metadata. So sometimes within a research protocol, we need to look at the context around the data that's written. So what we would need you to ask is to make sure that everything you write really is complete, that all of the expected elements that you would normally write are there. And within something like a pro forma that you might be given for the PRESTO study, what we ask is that you take note or you follow the instructions for how, for what the convention is for recording data. So if, say, you have somebody called, say, Samuel Thomas, it might be that you record them as S/T, but if they have a middle name, you would need to put that in as well. It's important when collecting high quality data in a research setting that we stick with the convention that we're asked to use, particularly as we usually pseudo-anonymise or anonymise our participants. So when it comes to initials and ID, what we ask you to do is make sure that you follow any instructions that you're given to make sure that we know exactly who is who within the study and there's no conflation, and to make sure that we can always associate the right data with the right participant. As you would for standard care, we need to be really clear when we cross anything out. We need to make sure that we don't occlude the original entry. Never ever use anything like Tipex or post-it notes or anything like that. But if there is a change made, we need to document the reason for that change to make things absolutely clear. So after you collect the data, and that's sent into the trial coordinators, all evidence must be available for sponsors to oversee and to provide evidence of maintaining those standards. And that good documentation would serve to demonstrate compliance with the standards of GCP and with all the other applicable regulatory requirements for the study.
So just to say on that, Mary, I just want to emphasise as the Chief Investigator how important it is for us to get such good quality data, because it's a real problem for the study if there's data that are missing or haven't been recorded right. So it sometimes sounds a little bit pedantic to talk about these things, but actually it's really important to us when we come to analyse the data. You can't rely on the data. Your study is just a total waste of time. So all of that is really important.
So looking at engaging patients in and with research, and of course within the PRESTO study, you will be the first people to meet patients before they become fully involved with the study. So we're going to have a look at engaging patients for a short time. Patients or participants, as we know them, are central to the research protocol, and we class them as an essential member of the research team. So in future, your role could be to identify potential participants. It could be that you can signpost somebody to relevant research for them, but most likely that you could introduce a study idea to a prospective participant. So within this study, the PRESTO study, your role primarily is to introduce that idea and hopefully receive verbal consent.
Yeah, exactly that. So we want you to identify people who've got suspected acute coronary syndromes with chest pain or discomfort, and identify them as people who might be in the study. And
here's the sort of third chunk really of Professor Alan Gore. So if you do have time, please take the time to listen to how Alan describes ensuring that patients are part of the overall picture and included rather than sort of having something done to them by others. If you want to learn more about research, there's a list of
links here for you.
Where you can find out more about research. The UK Clinical Trials Gateway, that's a searchable database of clinical trials being conducted in the UK for the public to use. It's about to undergo a facelift, but it will obviously still be called the UK Clinical Trials Gateway. I Am Research, under the NIHR website sort of banner, that gives patients, the public and NHS staff a chance to shout about how fantastic research is, and there are plenty of resources for you for in your practice and to help you with your conversations with potential participants.
And this is a slide just showing all the organisations that are involved. In fact, we've added even more to it since then. The Scottish Ambulance Service also involved, so lots of people involved in delivering this study as a big team. Thank you very much for your help. So this is a quick background on PRESTO. So just to tell you about why we're doing this study. So we know that chest pain is such a very common reason for patients to attend the emergency department. It's one of the most common reasons why people phone 999 for an emergency ambulance. And we know that most of the patients who don't actually have an acute coronary syndrome, but we have to take them to the emergency department and they have to have tests over a number of hours to find that out at the moment. We think there could be a better way. We could perhaps use prediction models like TMAC in the ambulance alongside point of care tests using portable devices to allow some people maybe even to stay at home with or without some follow-up, and some people to go to the specialist centres, get immediate treatment for their heart problem, and others might go to urgent care centres, ambulatory care centres. It would be much better than taking everyone to the busy, crowded Type 1 emergency department. So we developed TMAX as a prediction model that could help us to identify who doesn't have ACS with a single test, and also who definitely does, so that we reduce the number of patients who need further tests. And that can help us to make more efficient use of resources and reassure people a lot earlier. So we've done research with over 3,000 patients now, showing that over 40% of people could be immediately ruled out with TMAX using a single blood test. We use it in our emergency departments in Manchester, and we know that it can work with the point of care testing devices. So now we want to see if we can accurately use it in an ambulance, which would be amazing if we really can. So that's what PRESTO is all about. So we'll include 700 patients who call the ambulance 999 with chest pain, and then in the ambulance we want paramedic to identify who they think might have an acute coronary syndrome. So patients got some chest pain or discomfort. If you think it might be ACS, we want you to ask them to be part of this study. All we need from the patient in the ambulance is a verbal agreement. We don't need written consent at that stage because it's an emergency situation. And if they give us verbal consent, we'll come back to them later to get the full written consent. So we still get written consent, but it's done later. And we'll find out what happened to them later at 30 days. But in the ambulance, what we want you to do is simply record a few things that will allow us to calculate Tmax and also the heart score, which is another decision that could be used in that situation, and take a blood sample. So you put a cannula in like you might normally do, but when you put the cannula in, we also want some blood from that cannula. So if patients are taking part in the study, even if you wouldn't normally put a cannula in, they're giving their consent, we want you to put a cannula in, draw back a blood sample, and take it to the hospital with the patient. In the hospital, we'll do the testing. The reason we do it like that is it's very expensive to have a point of care testing device in every ambulance, especially because we're using free. So we'll make it easy and we'll do the testing in the hospital. And then if we show that this is accurate, you can then start to look at using the point of care devices in the ambulance in the future. What we need from you is to watch this video. Very simple and straightforward. You probably only need to read it once and then you'll be good to go. Those SOPs will talk through all of your involvement. In the ambulance, all we want you to do is record basic clinical data using that case report form, piece of paper. Tell us whether the patient's eligible or ineligible, and then we'll store those data, put them into a database and work out if Tmax is accurate enough. Here's a bit on the blood testing. So we need 4.5 mils of venous blood taken from a cannula. We give you the tubes, just take the tube. There's an SOP that tells you exactly how we want to take that tube, take it to the hospital, give it to the staff there, and they'll do the testing for you. So there are a list of contacts. We'll give those out separately because it's different for everyone in different regions. We've got a regional paramedic coordinator at each ambulance service. That's everything from us. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video.
And I said goodbye as well. Could point out that if you did wish to explore further research training, there's a web link at the bottom. NIHR Learn contains GCP training, but also contains small bite-sized chunks of learning. And in particular, a new one called Granule has just been uploaded to the system, which is meant to help those who are introducing a study idea.
So I hope that's been useful. I hope that you have everything you need to recruit to the study. If not, just let us know. We'll help. We're here to help. Good luck recruiting. Hope we get there on time. And thanks again for tuning in.